Now here's an unretouched photo. We're going to talk about, okay, so we talked about uh, stamp brush, okay, which is right here. And I could go here to my brush controls right here and go make this soft again. It's at 84, that's probably fine. And I could go here, right next to here, do my option click, and I can start painting all this stuff out, you know, cleaning up that image, okay? But there's a better way to do it. So right here, actually it's right here. And it's with your spot heal. This is, let's do the spot healing brush first. Spot healing is for stuff exactly like this. So I can just come here. I'm not holding anything. I'm literally just painting over these little spots. And what this is doing, I've got it on sample all layers. Now, if I just wanted to work on the one layer, I wouldn't do that. Remember, when you say sample layer or sample layer and a below, that means you're starting to, you're treating it like it's one image, but you're on a different layer, which is a great non-destructive way to work, okay? So if I was doing this for real, I would have a new layer here, and I'd be working on this, and I'd have it on sample all layers. So let's go back here. Let's go back all the way back. By the way, you can always go up to your window, or you can keep it over in your dock, to history, and just jump through whatever moves you made and get rid of them, or I can go all the way back to the original, which is what I just did. Now I'm going to make that new layer again, and I'm going to come in here with my spot healing brush. And what, okay, so what this is doing is it's using content aware. You can see it right here. That's the button it's clicked. What content aware is doing is it's analyzing what I'm trying to eliminate there, and it takes the information from around it and it paints it in itself. Does that make sense? Sort of like AI, but it was around sort of before that. I don't really consider it AI, but it's a great tool, and it's pretty damn accurate. You can see some of these I can just click on. Now, sometimes when you get too big with this tool, let's try it on his cheek here. Just see what the heck it is. No, it's stinky. No, it's actually not that bad. Now, something like this right here on the side of his nose. I might do what we talked about before, and I might make a selection here so I don't blur the edge of his nose. Go to my paths, activate that work path.
Mike, very quick question. You could use the lasso tool instead of the pen tool as well, right?
If you want to be really
Inaccurate or accurate?
inaccurate.
Oh, okay.
Okay, see how we kept that sharp edge on his nose? Yes?
Yes.
So start getting used to using your selections as masking elements, okay? Or whatever the word is for that. Okay, so then, you know, we just keep going. Now, there's another tool in here that's sort of, well, not sort of, what's the word for it? It's your stamp tool, but with content aware. So let's go all the way back again. Let's go to our history. Go all the way back to the original. And now it lives right here with your spot healing brush. There's a healing brush. This one won't work unless you do it just like the what do we call it? Stamp tool, except that it's using content aware, so I don't have to be so careful with it. It's also a little better for bigger areas. So it's going to analyze the area that I tell it to analyze, but it's also going to analyze the area around everything and sort of clean things up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Go right here. Again, your right or left brackets will make your brush bigger or smaller. Oops. Now, here's another little thing, you guys. He's pretty washed out. Okay, now there's a lot of weight. I think I got a question. Oh, I think she's talking. He's a little washed out. So I'm going to go to our hue saturation that we talked about last week. But here's the thing. If I go here, you know, I'm just going to, or if I go here, that's not too bad. Like it pushes a little more, and I'm just saturating a little more. It puts a little more warmth in his face. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
But you can go here under master. So right now what we're affecting is all the colors. And if I went, well, I just want a little more warmth in there, I could go to the reds. And all it'll do is just push the reds. Or the yellows. You know, and I can dial some of those in that way, the blues, the cyan. If I want that background a little more saturated or desaturated. So I could go to the blues and desaturate it. Let's see. Let's go to the cyan. And I could desaturate it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so content aware is analyzing what's around something and using that to, you know, correct or whatever it's doing, okay? That's the healing, spot healing brush and the healing brush, okay? One you have to treat like the your stamp tool, except that it has content aware abilities, and the spot healing brush, you just paint on it. You don't have to do anything else. Let's go further with our content aware idea. Yeah, so it's got a watermark on it, so don't worry about that. We're going to learn two tools here right now. So right here with your magic wand tool is your object selection tool. When you go here, up here in your control bar, you're going to get the option of a rectangle or a lasso. So I'm just going to take the lasso. And I'm going to go right around this girl. It's thinking. Okay, and you can see it made a selection. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm going to go cut and paste. So just pasted it right over. So if you just go, if you don't let go of the selection, you go cut and paste, it'll just cut and paste right back into the same shape. So if you want to have something cut and paste perfectly over what you had, that's how you do it. So I'm going to get out of this tool now. I'm going to turn off the girl in the front. I'm going to go back to I'll just use my polygon lasso tool for this. And I'm going to try and get pretty close to her. Not like right on it though. There's some new tools in here on lighting too that I want to show you guys later on. It'll do some of your lighting for you. Okay. Now, normally we'd have the option, and we could fill this with a color. Oops. Let's put another layer. You fill this with a color. Let me give it a color. You know, that kind of thing. We could delete it, you know, all that sort of thing, okay? But what we're going to do, so we're going to go here with that selection. We're going to go edit. And if you remember, right here is fill, which we've been using for color. And we've been using our foreground. We just keep it sort of defaulted on foreground. So I'm going to go fill. Gives me this, only this time I'm going to drop it to content aware. And then I'm just going to say okay. And you can see it just makes a selection. It normally doesn't get this green outline. I don't know what that is. Sometimes it's almost perfect. And then sometimes I got to come in here. Maybe I'll come back in with. Actually, let's try it with this. You know, I come in with different things. See, this is one where I think I need to use my regular stamp tool or clone tool, whatever they call it. You know, and I would just fix any little problems I have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like back here, this would be pretty easy to fix back here. I've got a line on here. I'm not sure where it's coming. Oh, there it is. That's what it was. It was on another layer. So let's go back here. And the main trick here is you want to make sure that you don't look like you're repeating, that you don't have weird shapes that are noticeable. Just stuff like that. But you can see it got rid of it pretty good. See, there's a repeating shape right there. I want to get rid of that. I want to make sure I don't have too many soft edges that are noticeable. And then that gives me the option of putting her back in. You know, if I wanted to move her around or something like that. Make sense?
Yes.
Content aware fill. Okay, and there's some ways we can really fine tune that. We'll get into that in a little bit. Let me see if I have this one file here because I could get this other tool out of the way. Now we're going to use another thing for eliminating images called patch tool, I think it's called. This one's kind of trippy, but it's also using like content aware technology, okay? So here's my beach scene with a bunch of ugly crap on it. So I'm going to go right. Liz with your spot healing brush and all that sort of thing. I'm going to go to my patch tool right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the thing that I want to get rid of, which in this case is this trash can. Make a selection. And then you can see when I hover over it, it gives me an arrow telling me to go that way. Okay, or whatever way. And if I pull it over, it analyzes that area around it and just fills it. Does that make sense? Let's do another one.
Wait, so if you move it, it disappears? Sorry, I just got confused for 2 seconds.
It
So
just
you
disappears.
select it, and then it disappears once you move it, right?
Yeah, you just drag it. So watch. And it'll give you which way to drag it.
Oh, okay.
And then content aware just figures it out.
Okay.
You know, so I could go through. Now, sometimes you don't want to do the whole row, but let's try the whole row. Sometimes that'll get too big and a little cumbersome. But who knows? Let's see. Now, it's telling me to go this way. It's going to run out of. No, that worked pretty good. Now, this is another image. If you guys notice, sometimes with images, or most of the time with images, could be tricky. Yeah, see, now I'm starting to pick up the people here. I don't want to do that. So now here, I'd probably go individually, maybe. Get really close. Yeah. No. Okay. And again, I could go here. I could push some saturation back into this image a little bit, like the waters, get the water a little bluer. Again, I might go here to master. I'm going to go to the reds. Pull a little more red in the beach and maybe some yellow. Yeah. And maybe even go to the blues. You don't want to overdo this stuff. But now here's another thing. So since we have this on a individual layer, here's another set of tools you want to start knowing about. In edit, transform, okay? And I'm going to go to distort. And now this will just let me move this thing, you know, from corner points and things like that, however I want to do it. It comes in really handy, okay? Also under there is transform, and you have a whole bunch of tools here. Scale, rotate, rotates obvious. Skew is if I do this and I grab a point, it'll do that. Or if I grab the point here, it'll do that. If I go edit, transform, distort what we just did, perspective, then I can grab this and sort of put it in perspective. Or if it was a 2-point, to do something like that. Edit, transform. So that's those. And then warp we'll get into a little more later. Okay, so let's look at, all that makes sense, correct? I want to set up what we're going to do, okay? I'm going to give you this crappy image because we're going to fix it, okay? Now, we're going to use the tools. We're just going to use the tools we've been using, okay? But start putting them together. So the first thing you got to do, get your pen tool and select this thing and get it separated by itself. You want to get rid of that background. The reason I picked this image is because it's a really bad image. Okay, it's like off eBay or something. By the way, if you're selling something on eBay, don't do this. The camera's too close, so it's forcing the perspective a little bit. Can everybody see that? It's also used a flash and he's super close, so it blew out one side of the camera. Okay. All these are bad things. So what we want to do is get this isolated first. So here's my image. Just isolated. Does that make sense? First thing I got to do is get rid of some of this forced perspective. So I would go to, in this case, I'd go to transform and probably perspective, and I just grab this side and just tweak it up a little bit. And just make sure it feels a little more in the proper perspective. Okay, that's pretty simple. Okay. So I'm gonna leave it like that for now because I got layers over it. Yeah. Here's another thing. Everything on this camera is black and white except the lens. So in this case, and here's the other thing. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this side of the camera's got a greenish bluish cast to it. This side is starting to warm up a little bit. So we have a temperature issue here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. I want to eliminate that. In this case, because the whole camera is black and white and there isn't really any color reflecting into it or anything, I'm going to go right here. And the only color thing I need to save is this lens. So I'm going to do this. And then if I hold space bar, I can move that selection around and get a good selection. So I'll get a decent selection. I'm not going to try and do it perfectly. I'll grab it to right there. I'm going to go Command C, Command V. Oops. I got to go to my original layer right here. Command C, Command V. That means it just pasted it right over where it was. Okay? That way I can save the lens color. Now, I'm going to go back to my camera. I'm just going to duplicate this. Call it working. Just for the demo purposes, I think it'll be easier. So now I have a copy of it called working. And I'm just going to go to my Control U, which is hue saturation, or up there into image. You know, it's under there. And I'm going to go to saturate, and I'm going to totally desaturate it. So now I evened it all out where it's all sort of warmish. Does that make sense? Okay. And the first thing you got to do, I would make a mask right here, or a little guard. And I got to start cleaning all this stuff up. Now, sometimes in a space this small, I'll just use my clone tool, grab the area right next to it. And I don't want to get those schmutzy repeats, so I got to be careful here. Then I might come in with my spot healing brush or something like that. I might even try that. Let's try that. And I think it's too big. Yeah, it's too big. Sometimes when you can't see your brush, you guys, like right now, I'm like, why is my brush so small? And I'm trying to make it bigger. If you go up here to your paintbrush control, it's at 2300. That's too big. It's off the page. I don't know how it got that big, by the way. So I'm going to just bring it down. And there it is. Now I can manage it this way. And I'm going to try and just go here. And I would get this all cleaned up, including this over here. And here's another thing I would do. I would go on here. I would grab this. Once I get this all cleaned up, I would come in here right up to this edge and use that hard selection. And then do the same thing on the other side. So I'm trying to get this thing to start to clean up a little bit, okay? Now here I might be able to use the spot healing brush.
Mike, this is Waleed. I've got a question.
Yeah.
Can you show how you made that selection again, please?
I just used my polygon lasso tool. That's it. Yeah? That makes sense? I was going to do it on this other side. I'd go this way.
I got it. Thank you.
Now we go this way. Grab my, in this case, just clean all that up. Oops, see, I went too high. Then I got to come back down here and then go back up. Come down here. Just clean things up. But I want to keep that little line in there. I just don't want it to, I don't want it to be all sloppy. And I would go through here all over. Here, here, and I'll show you something for here. That little rubber piece that doesn't look very good. Now, on this part, this textured part, and by the way, I'm using my polygon lasso tool because for these things, it'll work fine. Okay. If I needed a more, like when I'm trying to select out the camera, I'm gonna use my path tool because it's more accurate. And if I need something more accurate, I'm going to go to my path tool. So here I'm going to do quick selection. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this right rip, because that's what it's going to be. And I'm gonna go make the selection. Now, I would have already cleaned up the camera. I wouldn't have jumped to this yet, but I'm just jumping forward. I don't really need to go that far back because I'm probably not gonna go all the way back here. And I would make a decent selection, okay? Not this selection I made. This I might use the path tool for because there's a curve here. So I'd probably use the path tool. Now I've got this on its own layer, so it's the right grip. I'm going to go here to my swatches. I'm going to grab a mid-value gray. I'm going to go to my gradient tool. I'm going to switch it to go to basics. And I'm going to switch it color to transparent. And I'm just going to drag it that way. So let's try that. Here's another thing, you guys. When you're making complex selections in here, like let's say I did this with a pen tool, I want to keep that selection. You go right. So while I have a selection, I go select, save selection. I name it, right grip. And then I can deselect it. And I'm going to go, remember I told you the multiply layer will eliminate white. And basically, if I put a gray on it, it's just going to make the gray transparent, make it blend with the layer underneath. Okay. So I'm going to sort of use this gray to fill that crappiness on the grip. Okay. So I'm going to switch this to multiply. And it's already starting to clean it up. You can see that. Okay. It's doing two things. It's evening that grip out with the other side, and it's eliminating that blast of flash on that side, okay? So what I'm trying to do is get this side to even out with the other side where it doesn't feel like the guy was a foot from it with a flash cam, okay? I'm going to do the same little trick here. Once I get this all cleaned up, let's do it with our pen tool this time. I'd still have obviously a lot of cleaning up to do here. I don't really need to go all the way out here. It's good because that's going into the shadow value, so I'm not really that worried about the shadow value. Let's do it to here. It's probably not a good selection. Go to my paths. Activate the selection. Make a new layer because you want all this stuff on its own layer. Layer blends will not work unless they're on another layer above the layer you want to use it on. Okay. And let's just go right highlight. Just name them whatever makes sense for you. Two things. If you're working on a professional project, name them very clearly. So if you send that to somebody, they can look at the layers and they just get what it is. Okay. If you're just working on it for yourself, name things that obviously make sense to you, but make sure you name the layers. You can very quickly get 40, 50 layers going pretty easily. And it's a hell of a lot easier if you're putting them in groupings and folders and you're naming them something that makes sense. Okay. I'm going to do the same drill here. I'm just going to drag this gradient. Deselect it. I should have saved that selection. So let's, that's good. Go to multiply. And you can see it's starting to tamp that down. Okay. Now I can come in here with my opacity. That's a little better. That's a little better. What I'm trying to get it to is sort of even so I can add whatever kind of color or whatever I want to it. That's sort of what I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to get this to almost neutral. So that same idea would happen here, here, and here too. Like I want to control the lighting. I don't want the lighting controlling me. So I would do it here, you know, all through here. And then at some point I would come in here. And I'm not making great selections right now, so make better selections of them. I'm going to activate this selection. Same drill.
Do you want to save the selection?
Yeah, you kind of always want to. If you put any time into making a selection, save it.
Where do you find your save selection?
Right here under select. Save selection.
Where if you want to go back to your saved selection, where would you find your saved
Load
selection?
selection.
Oh,
And then you just drop down to the name and hit OK. And it'll make that thing a selection.
okay, thank you.
So we've got a little bit of that same idea here. I'm going to do the same thing. It's on multiply already. So then I'm going to go, I actually don't mind that. So that knocked that down. I do the same thing here. I would do the same thing here. In other words, all this side that's blasted out by the light, I'm going to basically do like that. Okay. Now, we talked about the dodge tool or the burn tool, which makes things darker. And I said you got to be careful with it because I use it on colors, and sometimes it'll just add a smudgy gray black into it. It's kind of gross. This is a perfect place where it will help you. Okay. So I'm going to go right here to my burn tool, which means it goes darker, and the dodge tool goes lighter. Okay. The exposure here is another name for what I've talked about before, the strength of this particular tool. So we've seen it called out as flow, we've seen it called out as strength, we've seen it called out as threshold, and now we're seeing it called out as exposure. They're all the same thing. It's just how strong is this tool. Okay? I don't know why. I get why they do it with this. This is a darkroom technique. I get it. So I get that. I've got it at 21%, and I'm telling it here, I want it to affect the shadows, not the midtones and not the highs. So I'm going to go in here now, go back to my original layer, because if you notice, this doesn't give me the option of doing a content aware thing or anything. So I could either make a copy of this original thing. I think it'll be fine for this. And I'm going to go, and you see how it just darkened that right back up, made it look newer? Because it's darkening only the darks. And this is a very clear demarcation between light and dark here. So Photoshop can read it really well, okay? Same thing here with this little grommet, this little rubber grommet. It'll just darken that up. And now I just got to go in and clean up these little white areas, that's easy, okay? I would have done that already, actually. But see how it gives it a little more contrast? It makes it feel a little newer, yes?
Yes.
Now, but it's not a good selection on the camera. This got, this is dirty and kind of messy looking. I clean that up. All this, obviously, I clean this lighting up. I'd probably go over here and do the same thing on this texture, only with a lot less of it, just to clean it up a little bit visually. This blown out thing I'd probably knock down because I want to get the lighting back down to more neutral, okay? So let's take this. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to turn that off and that off. And just turn the original back. Good enough for now. This is not where I would leave it at all. Now, here's another thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go here. I'm just going to make a white layer. Just to get rid of that transparency thing. And what I usually do with these kind of things, these quick things, is I give it a seamless background. So a seamless is just when you have that piece of paper that just goes up like that, and it's just seamless, okay? So I got a new layer. I'm going to write seamless. Pick a color. I like orange. So let's do blue. Now I can adjust the blue. So when I put the blue down, it might be screaming, but I'm going to adjust it so it doesn't matter. And I'm going to go to my gradient tool, make sure it's color to transparent, which we see the checkerboard. I'm just going to pull this. I'm holding shift to constrain it. And we start to get sort of a seamless idea. Okay. Now I'm going to go to hue saturation. I'm going to desaturate that a little bit. I think it's a little too saturated. Tweak it a little bit. Now I could also move through this and go, do I like another color better? I don't like that. I like that right there. I always use that hue thing and I shift through the spectrum to see if there's a better choice. Okay. Now, here's another thing we're going to do. We're going to take this, we're going to go option. Now I could just do it this way. Here's my working camera. Okay. I'm going to drag this down onto the plus and make a copy. Pull this down, I'm going to call it reflection. And I'm going to go up here to edit, same place we went to for our transform tools, because that's where this lives. Transform. I'm going to go flip vertical. I'm going to bring it down a little bit so I can see what I'm dealing with. I like to put it so it meets right there. So I'm kissing that edge right there. Now I'm going to go up here to edit again, transform, and in this case, I'm going to use the skew tool because all I need to do is pull this up. Now, if this camera was facing us directly, this would not be a problem at all, but you can see there's a perspective issue with this lens. Normally, I would pop this lens off, drop it down here, flip it, and it would solve that problem, okay? For the purposes of this, I don't care about that. Okay. Also, to be honest with you, if I'm just sending this over like to just give somebody a heads up or something, probably not going to fix it either. You'll see why here in a second. So I'm going to go back to our layer mask on this reflection layer, and I'm going to go make a layer mask. Now I'm going to go back to our gradient, and I'm going to switch this to black and white right there, black to white. If you remember, black reveals, white conceals. Okay, so this is the same thing, except we're doing it with a gradient. And then I'm going to go right here, and it's just going to create a nice smooth reflection. Does that make sense? Now I still might have to play with the opacity on it, knock the opacity down a little bit or something. This is actually fine. Okay. And then I'd probably put and I might do it this way, maybe not, I don't know. Let's try it. I'm going to make a copy of this. And let's do it again the same way. I'm going to drag this, make a copy of the camera, call it shadow. And this is sort of cheating the shadow. Put it behind it, make it a selection by control or command clicking the image. Then I'm going to fill it with a gray. And I'm doing an option fill or option delete, which fills it with the foreground color. Deselect it. And now I'm going to go to my, whatever you call it, transform tool again. And I'm going to go to distort this time. I'm just going to squash this down. And again, I'd have to play with the shadow a little bit, but if I'm just doing a comp, I don't really care that much. Actually, and I could cheat a shadow that way. Now, I would go up here to filter, blur, and just go to Gaussian blur. That just overall blends it. And all it operates off of is a slider here. Where I can blur it some more or less. And I'd probably put this on multiply also. Or I could like use the lasso tool and draw a little more accurate shadow if I wanted. Now here's another thing. I have this on its own layer. This kind of works because it looks like it's reflecting some of the color of the room. But one thing I might do is I might go and select this color, like a blue in here. Maybe this. Now, here's the only thing. It's going to turn everything in here the same color, but let's just try it. Control U, and I'm going to hit colorize. You know, and I could saturate it. Now, here's another thing.
Professor,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you go back and show the blur technique real quick?
All blur is if I have an object filled with a color or filled with anything. Oops, got to be on its own layer. Well, it doesn't have to, but got it on its own layer, deselect it. Filter. We'll go through these later. I mean, all these like different things in here. And go to Gaussian blur. And all I have to do is just pull this up. And that will determine how hard or soft that edge is. Does that make sense? Where'd you go?
Yes, that makes sense, but when do you use it? Like, when are good situations to use blur or extreme blur?
It depends on the job. There is no way I could say, oh, here's a good way to, you know what I mean? It's just, we'll start figuring it out as we're moving through all this. But there's no like overall time you use a blur tool. Does that make sense?
Hey, Mike, I thought you used the blur to wipe away edges or to soften edges. How do you do that?
Well, not really. I used the blur. I used this blur tool before. This paintbrush. Where is it? Right here. I use this blur, which means I can paint where I want it to be soft edged.
Oh, I missed that.
No, I don't think I said it. Because you go, well, the other thing was a blur tool. Here's the difference. If you go to, you have an image, and I go to blur, filter, Gaussian, no, let's just go here. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Don't go to blur gallery, blur, Gaussian blur. It's going to blur out the entire image uniformly. Okay? If I use my blur tool, I can blur things out selectively. I can blur just one thing. You see that?
And you use that on edges rather than trying to make a selection and blur the selection.
Yeah, it's you use it like a paint tool. So it's just like, it's more organic.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And yeah, exactly. Sometimes I might go, well, I want this edge a little softer. You know, if I had a 3/4 view like that on a face, I might just want to blur this edge of the head a little bit, not this up here. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All these tools, again, and there's certain things I'm going to be a broken record on here, but all these tools are, you got to just learn right tool for the right job. So I'm going to make a copy of this lens. So I can play with it. And I could come in here under hue saturation, you know, and I could change the hue. Oops. Oh, see, that's what it's doing. It's affecting every layer. So when you do an adjustment layer, it's going to affect every layer underneath that. Sometimes you don't want that. Okay. And I can make a selection and we'll talk about that later, but I'm just going to make a copy of it for now. And I could go here to the hue saturation and just run through the color spectrum and see if there's a more interesting lens. But like sometimes I like to put a little warmth in there to counter the blue. And I could make the excuse there's a light up here. There could be something up here that's reflecting into it. So it could happen. I tend to like to get that little amber in there because it's got a little bit of orange, and orange is a complement of blue. And sometimes I just like that. Does that all make sense, you guys?
Yes.
Questions? Oh, here's something else. The burn tool that we use to darken up this logo. So let's go to that again. Burn tool. I've got it on shadows. I've got it at 21%. I hit this. Oops, I got to go to my actual layer. And it darkens it up, cleans it up a little bit. And it's not overspraying. If I go here and I go, well, I can do the same thing here. A little bit there, but it's here. It starts picking up this stuff around it. So I'd probably have to come in. You'd have to clean that up anyway. Okay, now, here's another thing I could do. I could put another layer on here. Let's say ambient lighting. Now I'm just going to click my camera outline or my camera selection right here, control click. I'm going to go up here to my ambient lighting thing, and I'm going to pick this blue that's in the room right there. And I'm going to go back to my gradient. I'm going to switch it back to color to transparent right there. I'm going to drag some of this blue over this. Then I'm going to go and see if I have a good overlay that'll help me. That's not terrible, but it's too much. That's overlay. That's actually not that bad right there. So let's pull back the opacity on this and see if that does it. And I can just cool that down a hair, okay? Which will start to speak to the color that's in the room, okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like even these highlights now are cooled out a little bit. Okay, so I can, the further you can go with starting to understand, let me try it here. Might not work here. Let's see. New layer. I might want this to be a little hotter like that. And then I'm going to pull it way down. Just a hair. Now, I've also said I got some orange in here. So maybe here, I'll go through my color spectrum again. And I'll try and find that like right there. And then pull it. Now I could still go through these again. That's lighten. That's actually not bad right there. And then pull this down. You see how it warmed up that edge a little bit and kind of speaks to this warmth a little bit? Does that make sense, you guys? I could have, okay, when you're doing this kind of thing, I always have a light logic going on in my head. Because somebody could say, well, the seamless and everything's blue, so that's sort of saying that the environment's blue. And I'm going, well, if I was a photographer, I could have a light out of range here that's just a fill light that's warming things. I could totally do that. I mean, this would have to be really subtle. Put another layer and call it spill. This might not work, by the way. But again, digitally, I can try any. I'm going to take this orange here. Oops. It's going to be too dark, but that's fine. too bad. Needs to be more orangey. Oops. I'm gonna blur this a little bit. And a lot of times when I'm doing, oops, I need to take my selection off, otherwise the edge can't blur. Blur, Gaussian blur. I just want to blow this whole thing out. I would put this behind everything. Maybe do an overlay. Yeah. And really pull this back. And I just warmed up that ground just a hair, so it's starting to speak to the same thing that's creating this and this. And I like that little bit of warmth in there with all that blue. Does that all make sense, you guys? I might do this. I might put another thing on here, another layer, and call it lens reflection. And this will give us another example of using the blur tool a little bit. There's that. I'm just going to go to white in this case. I don't usually do that. Or actually, I'm going to go to like a bluish. I'll go to this blue. But I'm going to lighten it up. We'll see in a second. Now I'm going to take my color to transparent. I might go in with my eraser here. I need my eraser to be softer, so I'm going to soften up this brush just like we do on any brush. Go a little bigger. I'm going to take my blur tool that we just talked about. I want to blur this edge. I don't want it totally blurred. I want it to be a little harder edge. See if there's a nice overlay. That's kind of nice. Now we got a little more, I always call it active light in that reflection. Okay. And active light just means to me is light's moving. Like if you're decorating the house, you go, we need something chrome over there, so we got some active light. Okay. And then I might go another one and go, let's just go highlights. And maybe I'll just take that same brush, shrink it down. Give it a little highlight. Could do it there a little bit.
What if you put that highlight in the reflection?
It is. You mean down here?
Yes.
I don't think I would. I don't want to call a lot of attention to that reflection. Okay, guys. I will see you in the morning. Yeah?
Thank you.
All right.